So female.
Right. So you're asking like, why is there like a positive effect here? Yeah. So I guess the answer is I don't have good information. I mean, it's clearly true that there's like there's a difference in difference here, but as to why there's a positive coefficient here, I mean, I guess like one story is that if I'm a man and I have more control of the household, then I'm, nonetheless going to expect my wife to work on my field as well and apply like with her.
Data question,
yep.
Which is about in Ghana. I would guess that in a bunch of the patrilineal locations, wage labor is primarily people migrating out and away from the households. How well are they captured in the household survey data? So are you just capturing male wage workers in matrilineal locations because they're still living in the household?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's two answers to that. One is that my sample is, so in this questionnaire, it's asked what district were you born in? And that's, so I'm taking nationally representative and I'm asking where were you born? And that's my sample definition. So if I was born in a rural area, but I'm in Accra now, you're in my sample still because like you were born in an area where there was a potential to inherit. So I think among individuals that are sort of born at a given point of time and, as of the 2000 census are, nationally representative, I think it's doing a good job of picking up those individuals. I think the question of people that were sort of in wave one that potentially migrated away in subsequent waves, I think relative to a lot of surveys, efforts were made to track individuals. So it was like, of split offs, the surveyors made attempts to go and find those individuals. But I think it's, still like a really hard thing that I think a lot of questionnaires don't do as well. So I think like I could probably do more to look at attrition and try to see what's going on there. But I think, I don't think it's unique to my context. And I think in fact, this data is probably better than the average data set in terms of capturing migrants that were in a rural area at one time of, wave one of the data, but subsequently moved. All right, so these patterns I showed you with respect to the returns to skill across the different sectors and the fact that matrilineal men are basically being pushed into the labor market. So just something about the slope effects, right? That matrilineal men are more likely to be in the labor market, and there's a much steeper slope if you're sort of anywhere other than the very left of the skill distribution. In terms of level effects now, so thinking about, sort of for individuals with relatively low levels of returns to being in the labor market, how do wages compare to farm profits? And what I find effectively is that even at the very lowest levels, if I look at the bottom, if I look at the distribution of wages for individuals that are in the bottom quartile of cognitive skill as measured again by these tests on Raven matrices, et cetera, as well as education, I find that they're roughly comparable to being in the third quartile of land. So if you say like, there's a distribution of all individuals that have land, what are their profits? These are the lowest level landholders, second holders, third holders, fourth holders. So effectively, even working for a very low wage in my context seems to be better than most farmers. And so it's sort of comparable to being, a 75th percentile farmer in terms of the amount of land you own. Am I in time?
You got 5 minutes.
Okay, great. And there's a similar pattern present for women. As I mentioned, there's very few women in the labor market, so you'll see these sort of estimates are a bit wider, and these are very noisy estimates that I guess I'm not playing with my kernel densities, but the same pattern is true for women, that it seems also for them that despite the barriers, that women that actually are in the labor market, it's better than managing a farm for the most part. Okay, great. So now I'm going to turn back to this question of I told you effectively matrilineal men are leaving farming and going into the labor market. This seems good both in the sense, in a level effect sense that even sort of the lowest paying labor or wage labor seems to be better in most cases than farming. And moreover, if you are sort of have higher levels of schooling, you seem to be benefiting from capturing the returns to your skill. Now there's the question of basically, because men are being pushed into the labor market, is there this sort of negative offsetting effect with respect to agricultural productivity? So first, going back to this measure that I constructed with Levins and Petrin, and then I further did controls for land quality. I basically controlled the way things like soil quality, rainfall, et cetera. So this first term is my unadjusted term, and then 3, 4, and 5 are with these land quality adjustments. And you'll see that a reliable feature I find is that women have lower total factor productivity. But you'll see that when I look at the female matrilineal effect, that there's a sort of offsetting effect. And so the net result is that when you look at the total factor productivity across the two inheritance regimes, that I can't reject that they're equal. Basically, it's the case that more women are in farming, and it seems that there's a penalty that they're facing with respect to productivity. So maybe they have access to worse inputs or something else, but as best I can measure it, they seem to have lower TFP. And matrilineal is going to push more women into farming, but it seems as though sort of maybe because there's more women, there's an offsetting effect where the male-female TFP gap is smaller in matrilineal than it is in matrilineal. And so the net effect is that I can't reject the null, the two inheritance regimes are equal. And so, as I mentioned, this system of female inheritance is associated with higher per capita productivity. And I think given the patterns that I observed with respect to differences in selection, differences to returns to skill across sectors, it seems as though this movement that's happening, where men are moving into the labor market, is responsible for these differences in productivity. And that this isn't coming out in return with an offsetting loss in farm productivity. And I think the key reason for this appears to be the fact that there's this asymmetry where women are unlikely to be in the labor market, coupled with the fact that there seems to be this really tight linkage between actually inheriting land and subsequently being on a farm. And so I think an important takeaway, therefore, is it speaks to, I mean, I've talked about flexibility, but I think it speaks to a lot of potential frictions that exist in this economy, and that you could imagine there would be productivity benefits to relaxing them. So I think one obvious case is that you could imagine allowing for rental markets or sale markets, or even just allowing this dissociation where it's seen as not risking appropriation if your wife is the one managing the farm rather than you. Seems like something that would have benefits. But then I think also fundamentally, this asymmetry where I see women are unlikely to be working for a wage speaks to a lot of negative effects with respect to productivity associated with the fact that women have fewer opportunities than men. And so I think you can imagine there's a lot of potential constraints, and I mean there's a lot of research that's looked into this, where you can imagine that if I could instead observe symmetric outcomes where if men inherit, women are working for a wage, if women inherit, men are working for a wage, would be a better equilibrium. And finally, I guess one thing I'll say is that I think all of what I've talked about is sort of if you were just doing like a big macro dummy of land traditional institution 1, 0, like all of this classifies as 1, right? So it's this heterogeneity I'm observing that it seems important is within the context of traditional institutions, which I think sort of, suggests there's a role for microeconomists to play in structural transformation, that there's a lot of heterogeneity and a lot of cultural institutions that matter and that are going to shape the process of what occupation people sort into and what their productivity is.
Fantastic. Start with those two.
Yeah, I have two small questions. So the first is a clarification question. So how can you just calculate the farmer level TFP? Because I think in my sense, female and male will work together on planting this land. So the TOP is at the land level. So how can you?
Yep.
And another question is, I think it's hard for me to imagine why when the female can inherit the land, the man will exit agriculture. Because again, I think they need to work together on planting this land. So why the inheritance affects the activity of man.
Actually, my question is very similar to Chin's question, but let me just add a little bit. So your labor input is still day's work, right?
Yeah. So
could you add some time use information in it, because there's a big, at least for average woman and average man. I think when Karen and I wrote that time use paper, so woman is 3 times more in home production compared to men. So very little labor input. And then the second question is also related to Chin, which is basically, it's difficult to think how who owned the land really matters, because she will get married to a man, and if a man own the land, he will get married to a woman. So the question is there a paid job around the farm that, I could just send off, I'm thinking about the migration decision.
Yeah.
Because in case of China, they might have to think about whether they migrate together or they split once they, to guard the land, because the same land insecurity is there.
Yep.
So one of them have to stay and the other go off to work.
Yep.
So, yeah,
Great. Yeah, so I think those are, they're all, I think, relevant and important questions. I think I did a very sort of inadequate job of really digging into the TFP, because I was sort of rushed for time, but I think you're right. So to give you sort of a big picture of what I did. So there's this question, right, of how to measure labor. And so what I observe in my data is days worked by yourself and then by men and women on a given field. There's this question of the idea, right, that, so I want to separate the managerial productivity from actually the brawn-based labor, right, that men maybe are bigger, and so for hoeing or tasks like that, they have an advantage. What I observe in the data, so I observe wage data for a very small, well, not that small, but a minority of labor is applied by wage labor, where someone is hiring someone. And when I look at throughout my data, a pretty consistent pattern is that the effective wage of women, so how much are women paid for farming in this community, is 80% of that of men. And so in my base case, I assume that effectively 1 day of female labor is 0.8 days of male labor, but then I also play around with it, manipulate it. And I find that, when I scale up to 100% or when I scale even down to 0%, so effectively saying, the only labor that counts is male labor, I still find this productivity difference. I think it's probably true, what exactly the right number is, I think is somewhat unclear. And I think, the fact that the labor market says it's, if men are paid 10 CDs, women are paid 8 CDs, is somewhat diagnostic, but I think there's still some uncertainty around those estimates and what the right measure is. And then yes, for this question of thinking about, I think there's sort of how do men organize? What does it look like when women are inheriting? I think the short answer is that there's lots of different permutations that this can take. And so sort of in my data, I see lots of different arrangements. And so it's sort of hard to say one is the right way to think about it. One example is exactly what you said, that I observe plenty of cases where matrilineal women are managing farms and their husbands are not in the household. So they're working in the city. I see also cases where women are managing a farm and supplying their labor and men are doing something else in the area. And then, yeah, so I think this question of sort of what other opportunities are there, I think is going to be very heterogeneous. And so there's probably some very remote areas where, I don't know, maybe the man is working in agricultural labor, or maybe he's also applying his labor to the field. But I think there's also probably plenty of cases where they're sufficiently close to cities or to large enough urban areas that they can be supplying their labor there.
Another random question. Robin.
I guess if you take this sort of RC2 lens, the big question would be, can we compare the places that are matrilineal? So how does that work? Are they completely geographically distinct? Or they
So there's both areas that are geographically almost all patrilineal, areas that are almost all matrilineal, and there's areas of overlap. Because I'm using these district of birth fixed effects, I'm effectively the variation I'm using in my data is districts where there's both present. I think you can imagine you'd want to be even finer or something else. And so I don't think it's sort of fully equivalent to an RCT, right? And I think a lot of why I'm thinking about these mechanisms and the patterns is that if you can see, all right, these are the individuals who are selecting, again, one's controlling for these geographic fixed effects, maybe that sort of hints at the mechanism. And sort of, again, there's this question of what are the other hypotheses that can explain these patterns? And I think, my argument sort of rests on what I'm seeing best explains it, but I agree, it's sort of
the kind of element that you will never win.
right.
But I guess because somebody could come up with matrilineal places or patrilineal places are more repressive of women as well as giving them.
Right.
Anyway, I think what you've done is.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think it's a question I've thought a lot about, and I wish there was sort of a cleaner way. But I think this idea of this global female empowerment, I think you can maybe tell a story where it's still frees up men to be leaving for the labor market and women to be, I mean, you know, it's like, I guess the patterns I'm seeing are sort of, it seems this like empowerment story is sort of inadequate to explain the set of things I'm observing.
So really to clarify on the intensive versus extensive margin, so just to make sure I understand. When you have patrilineal, if you have, let's say, 6 children, are you dividing it equally between the 3 men? So on average, you have 3 men, 3 women, and you divide them equally between the 3, and now you have matrilineal divided equally between the 6. So then, you know, there were some fall in acreage that you were showing in the matrilineal, or is it that in both cases you give it to your 2 favorite children, so it's not a matter of.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand, because you said it's not on the intensive margin, it's on the extensive. I didn't fully
Yeah.
understand.
So yeah, let me see if I can adequately characterize. So the like long run historic thing is one where it's like, you know, all sons inherit in patrilineal and in matrilineal, all maternal nephews inherit. As these sectors have grown, you see people that are sort of, I think, staying in more of or like applying labor to their parents' plots to sort of convey and communicate that they want to be farmers. And so you see this often in like the discussion of farmers will talk about how like I saw land was small and so I went and like left for the city, or like I applied a lot of land to my father's plot so that he would give me something. And so I think like in the very sort of, you know, anthropological ethnographic atlas, it would suggest that the historical custom is land is split and passed to all sons, and then land is split and passed to all maternal nephews. I think in practice in the data, it's like this action of sort of sons versus daughters does not seem to be the case that everyone is like, because it's now the case that both sons and daughters are inheriting, that everyone is inheriting half. It instead seems to be that sort of you're passing your land on to a particular child, and you know, under this matrilineal system, there's more flexibility in that regard. But I think to your question, I could probably do like a more thorough job, and I should have it like off the top of my head.
There were some columns about like the
Yeah.
acres going, so that's what confused me.
Yeah. So I guess like, yeah, that's right. So I report acreage, which, you know, reflects in practice, I'm sure, a combination of, you know, intensive and extensive inheritance. And I should do like I think you're right. I should do a thorough job of saying like, you know, probability. Well, yeah, I guess I have, right. Like, do you have any land? Right. So this
Yes.
inherited any land, inherited any land.
Exactly.
Right. And so, yeah, I see your point. I should like do a job of saying like, how much of this is just like everyone is inheriting this versus bringing back. You know, I think that's well taken.
A second
Yeah.
follow-up. What about selection? So which plots we give to which child depending on gender? So do women get the plot that is closer to home that maybe has been overproduced and it's low quality?
That's a good suggestion. I haven't looked at distance. I've tried basically to, you know, do machine learning where I take like all these characteristics of soil quality and, you know, look at the Gaias and try to predict land quality on the basis of that. And then, you know, see, I don't find any evidence of correlation, but I think that's very plausibly also just that like, I'm not picking up soil quality very well. And so I think like, I think these differences I see in productivity are very plausibly explained by differences in, you know, unobserved heterogeneity. And I think distance is a nice suggestion to look into, but I haven't come up with a way of sort of getting into that.
Two comments.
Yep.
One is a direct follow-on, which is just thinking of the stuff I've done with Chris and other work I've done. This unobservable differences in land quality is a huge thing, and I don't think anybody's got a handle on it. Even the people who've done kind of really detailed soil tests, doesn't. You get some signal out of it, but it explains a very small fraction of what looks like. Looks like there's big unobservables in land quality, just kind of fundamentally. And so a worry is that to the extent that the unobservables for women's land are getting loaded into your TFP variable, I just think it's worth being cautious in how you interpret that.
I think that's right.
And I guess the second comment is a much broader one, kind of thinking of the really interesting big picture issues here. There's in all kinds of ways, there's a huge degree of Ghana specificity to this, to the analysis, or potentially sort of, let's say, West African specificity. But a really interesting case that might be worth looking at is, I think, there's a great book that, gosh, I'm old. There's a great book that Agnes Kiesembing and Marcel Bachchamp wrote on, which shows a very different pattern in the Philippines, in which girls got education and boys got the land. That's kind of a norm. And precisely because the boys are expected to stay on the farm and to farm. And so I think bringing, just even kind of reflecting on that and some other examples, not that you need to analyze them, but thinking of the comparative perspective here might be really interesting. That the cultural norms of different places as they relate to labor market opportunities and everything else vary quite a lot across contexts.
I think that's right. And I think that's all like worth thinking about. I would say, yeah, that obviously these specific cultural institutions and, you know, the interplay between matrilineal, patrilineal, and these, you know, Christianity and British rule is specific to this context. I think there's probably, and I could do a better job of documenting this, plenty of differences with respect to the rigidity or flexibility of inheritance and, like, you know, who inherits and who doesn't. And so thinking about, you know, like Nilesh Fernando shows that, like, you know, in India where it's firstborn sons who inherit, they sort of seem shackled to the soil and they should be leaving more. And so that's like another specific dimension that matters. And so I think I see this as building up this body of evidence about how sort of, you know, who can inherit, who can exit, what are the opportunities to men and women, how do they differ, you know, is going to affect the process of structural transformation. And this is like one specific mediator of that process rather than like, this is, you know, the only thing that is of relevance.
Good question. Crowd looks somewhat subdued. I think by the end of the second day, maybe we just thank Nate here and say really interesting. Thanks, John. Tommaso, we get you to start 5 minutes early. That means you
I
have
take it.
5 extra minutes.
I'll yeah, sure.
Or
I have lots of slides, so. And also, you know, I suspect that some people have to leave at some point, so if you have planes to catch, so maybe I start. Should I start? Or you want the 5 minutes break?
People need a 5-minute break? No, I think
No,
just
okay,
keep going.
I start. Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay, so first, thank you so much for like, you know.
Take you 5 minutes to read the authors.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for inviting me to present this paper, and thank you so much for everyone that, like, you know, stick around until the end of this 3 for some, like, you know, terrific days. So this is joint work with many co-authors, like Vittorio, that is, like, you know, Southern California, and essentially, like, you know, with him we have been started, like, you know, working for now, like, you know, a few years, try to build up a little bit like this agenda and to try to open up a little bit the black box of the production function, really try to understand how these, like, you know, small firms, you know, organize. And this is, like, you know, the like, you know, paper is, by the way, I should have said, it's very much work in progress, this agenda. And there's, like, you know, Jay and Ridvika, which is, like, you know, terrific PhD students at PSC and Kellogg, and Alessandra is, like, you know, a macroeconomist, and now I'm trying to drag into the macro development crowd at NYU, and Esau, he's, like, you know, also part of essentially this agenda since the very beginning. He's an economist at, like, you know, mainly sitting at Ganda, and he's the person somehow that tell us whether our, like, you know, narrative and stories, like, you know, making sense. So he's been, like, you know, really influential part of the team. Okay, so the premise is a kind of very obvious fact for this crowd. That is that if you look at low-income countries, firms are small and they have low productivity. And there is, of course, like a massive literature studying this. And usually, like, you know, the small firm size, it is interpreted as a symptom of essentially either some sort of external frictions that we try to relax in RCT, such as, you know, credit market frictions, labor market, or like maybe, like, you know, a lack of access to market and so on and so forth, or some sort of, like, you know, low endowment, so maybe limited availability of technology, or maybe just because maybe countries are, like, low income, it's not appropriate for them yet to adopt technology, maybe, like, you know, low human capital, it takes time to, like, you know, build schools and so on and so forth. Now, in this paper, we started trying to focus inside the firm, and in particular, focusing on how firms are organized. And somehow, the idea is that if you look at the way in which firms are organized in low-income countries, at least this is going to be a paper about manufacturing in Uganda, it really seems that their internal organization can be conducive itself to kind of a low productivity and a low effective scale, meaning that even in a first best unconstrained world where firms can access credit, still they would like to stay small because anyway, given the way in which they're organized, there are no big economies of scale. Yeah, so what's going to be the idea is that essentially if you have some sort of barrier to labor specialization, again, you cannot really exploit these economies of scale coming from the division of labor, coming from having the most skilled individuals specializing on the hard task. And this is going to lead both to low level of productivity in general, but in particular to a low ability to scale up the firm. So essentially, if you try to have more workers, the productivity is going to decline. And both of these forces kind of lead to small firms. And so if you want to take one kind of big picture idea, what we are trying to understand in this paper is whether the business model of traditional manufacturing is or is not scalable. And our answer is doesn't really seem to be scalable. Martin.
Do you want to think as a business on someone or do these external frictions and limited resources?
No, not at all. I think it's going to be very complementary. So in the model, essentially we are going to have these external frictions. Then we're going to say, aha, if you want to relax the external frictions, but the business model is not scalable, you don't get bigger turn on the box. I should do exactly that exercise in the quantitative model. At the same time, of course, you may think, well, maybe this organization is prevalent exactly because there are external frictions. We have that channel in here, but we're a little bit silent in the sense that all these type of arguments are going to be local, given the firm size distribution observed in Uganda. So the biggest firm are going to have 10, 12 employees, and they still have bad organization. We are not going to be able to say anything about, well, maybe if you really relax the constraint, these firms will grow to 50 people and they will change the organization. On that, we honestly have no idea how to answer that specific question. So what do? We have 3 parts. The first part of the paper effectively, show you some new data. Okay, so potentially a core contribution here of the paper is to design essentially a survey that we conducted in Uganda over a couple of years to try to see how these firms are internally organized. And so then we first are going to just show you the data and along 2 dimensions. First, what do firms do? And somehow we are going to use time diaries to try to make the point that in small and relatively big firms, so think of it from 1 to 10 employees, essentially the type of tasks that people do are very similar. So a big firm is just a replica of many small firms just side by side. Then we're going to say, well, maybe they do the same task, but they change who does what. And here we're going to find some evidence of specialization, but limited. Okay, we're going to see, yes, the firm owner tends to specialize a little bit more on the hard stuff, but there's a lot of overlap between what everyone does in the firm. And then we're going to try to ask a little bit, this is kind of the weak part of the paper where we are more speculative, well, why there's limited specialization? And we are going to try to argue that part of it is due to the way in which essentially informal manufacturing is. Everything is customized, everything is done on order. We're going to try to build up a narrative with the data, of course, that this may generate some sort of cost to unbundle tasks and specialize. Let's spend some time there. Then we're going to write down a model. This is going to be a model where essentially the allocation of talents, people are heterogeneous and they have a skill that is going to be allocated both within firms across tasks, but also across firms on an equilibrium. And we are going to, the model is going to characterize somehow how the allocation of talent is going to have integration of the firm size distribution, and then eventually productivity. And really the kind of cool part of the model it is designed to span different type of organization. From what we call self-employment within the firm, which is the title, essentially where a firm is just a collection of people doing the same stuff, to the other extreme, which is something more aligned with the Lucas model, where really what matters in a firm is the ability of the entrepreneur. It's what we call scalable entrepreneurial talent. And the result is kind of obvious. That if you have frictions to specialize, it's going to be bad. So firms are going to be smaller and going to have low productivity. Okay? But we are going to be able to kind of use the model to characterize exactly how, under which conditions, and in particular, then the model is going to essentially provide us a laboratory to then go back to the data and try to do some sort of quantification exercise. So that's the last part of the paper. It's really much work in progress. I'm going to show you some sort of exercise at the end. But what I think is going to stay even once we have like the fuel estimation, it is that essentially we estimate in the data a fairly large unbundling cost, specialization cost. Meaning essentially that if you think about these two extreme cases, we are closer to this one. Okay. So that essentially if we think of firms just as collection of self-employed individuals, you pretty much get like most of like the aggregate firm size distribution and everything else kind of right. If you instead take the model and run the other extreme, that is, what if you take this estimated model and you go all the way to fully scalable entrepreneurial talent? Well, that will predict like a much bigger kind of firms and much higher productivity. And in the model, of course, it's not that firms are small just because there is these internal frictions. There is going to be an external kind of wedge that keeps firms small. In terms of policy, and this again, like back to Marty point, you kind of got it right away from the beginning. Why does this matter? Well, because there is this interaction. So if we try to relax, we try to train people, but then if we cannot scale, maybe like we create amazing entrepreneur, but if they cannot scale their talent given the organization, doesn't really matter. We try to relax credit frictions to firms that anyway don't want to grow, doesn't really matter. Okay, so the survey, unless you have like questions. Yes.
Can you clarify a bit the compensation of workers? So when you say self-employment, I'm thinking of people who they exert more effort because they're going to get a bigger share of the profits.
Yeah.
Are they? Should I think of self-employment in that sense?
Yeah.
In which sense should I think
Great.
of self-employment?
Great. So no, in the sense that like I will spend some time on compensation. So we have data on compensation. Kind of the good thing to some extent it is that everything here is piece rate. So then anyway, people are like paid for a fraction of like the task that they do. Of course, there's going to be like a wedge because then the entrepreneur like extract lots of rents out of a production, and we are not really thinking of like self-employment in terms of like effort. So there's not going to be somehow like a net compensation, but it would be interesting to study that because of course we're not going to have anything interesting on that dimension in terms of any hold up problem or so on and so forth. I'm going to be very specific on how people are compensated once they're right here. But somehow those set of very interesting questions are going to be very in the background here. Essentially, we're not thinking that the incentives of people to work hard is varying across the consolidated distribution. Of course, the wage inequality is going to vary. The returns to skill at the individual level is going to vary, and we're going to both have data that help us like pin down these parameters, and also like the models are going to have predictions on that. But the exciting economics on incentives is going to be in the background, meaning not in the paper. Yes, Robin.
How do you think, say, of a multinational coming in, they've already sorted out how to specialize? Could that sort of?
Remind me, I have a bullet point that is called why IKEA doesn't go in Uganda, and I'll talk about it like that. I'm very proud of that bullet point, so I'll take that. Okay, the survey. So this is Uganda. We have like these blue areas is where essentially we have an operator. We have three sectors: carpentry, so they make like doors, tables, welding. They're gonna put together a piece of metal to do like windows and beds mainly, and grain milling, where like people shop with like bags of maize and then they pass through a machine and they get flour. Now this is quite a big deal. So I put big. This was for like Joe, but Joe took catch the train already, so it's not here. But essentially, it's 35% of manufacturing employment in the sector. Also, we picked this sector because we want to have sectors which are not dominated by micro enterprises. Like if you're familiar, like we saw the word in Uganda, there's like lots of like hairdressers, which are like 1 or 2 people firms. Here we have lots of like 5, 7, 8 employees. There is potential for scale in the organization. We have more than 1,000 firms, roughly 3,000 employees. We serve roughly half of the employees within the firm. Baseline, a couple of follow-ups. Just like STEG gave us money, IGC gave us money, so thank you. People, Pedal also just gave us some money. I guess it's the one competitor here, but thank you everyone that is here, like responsible for kind of funding us. Keep doing that. So the main innovation in the firm, as I say, is like having time diaries. Okay, so the idea here is that we wanted to see like what people do, and so both in general like task composition, so whether the overall amount of task and type of task and time spent on each task done varies, and also who does it. And so the way in which we did that is that essentially we ask to everyone for like the last day they work, is the exact wording, pretty much when they start working and what did they do at any hour of the day. Okay, so we ask like when do you start, when you stop. Then we say, okay, just like check boxes for every hour that we are actually doing something at the firm, like present at the premise. And then for each one of these box, we ask them, okay, which activities did you do? And of course, these activities is not like, we came up with it. We did like lots of focus groups, so on and so forth. And we have 24 by the way, but for some reason, designer only showed me 16. And show you like, some of these in detail, but essentially like, some of the stuff are like being idle. Some of them are like very production, one other are more like the managerial type of activities. We also have a lot of other information in the survey and like, we'll keep collecting them. A few stuff which I want to point out. So we have data at the production step. So, for one main product. So in carpentry, it's going to be to make a door. We know all the different steps and we see how much time people spend on each step. And we try to see whether this varies across different size distribution. We also have some sort of organizational practice. So these are firms. We know how people are paid, how wages are set. We are also asking like, how some wages are responding to different type of shocks. So this is important somehow to pin down the parameters of the model. Then we have like, some index of like, managerial practices, which is kind of, useful just to get a sense of like what are good and bad firms. Okay. So the way we shall do this, I will first just show you like some very basic descriptives, then I will like, zoom into like, the meat, that is essentially the type of tasks which are done. And then I will try to kind of like, try to speculate a little bit of whether we would have expected more or less specialization. So this is the firm size distribution. That's the histogram. And really what I want to like, stress here essentially is that this is not a typical setting where like there's a spike here. There is quite a bit of relatively large firm. Okay, so this is, roughly 10% of the firm have like 10 or more employees. Now 10 or more are nearly 10 or 12. Okay, you have like one firm with 30 employees, but essentially, but there is at least the potential for specialization of labor. Some more like, summary stats. So what is the average firm size? Like around 5. These are fairly like well-established firm. They use some sort of machineries. They have a formal license. This is not really like, formality, but means that, they've been around for like, 10 years on average. The one kind of key new aspect I want to stress it is that people in these firms do two activities. One is just production. Okay, this is how we think about it, but also they sell. So finding customer is a crucial part, is a crucial component of like, the activities, and it's also, we think, part of where it comes like, productivity. So firms complain that they don't find customers. They don't have any sort of like, marketing. So they don't have an established reputation. The way in which actually convince customers that their products are good and that, they deserve to be paid well is, what is it? Like, here, talking to them. Okay, so this is really where essentially the interaction with customers is important. I'm stressing this out because in a few slides, I will show you that one of the most like complex or skill-intensive tasks in this setting is this customer interaction. Okay, and we think that that makes sense because we see that that is an important feature, it seems, from just descriptives. The bullet point. So very limited internet export. So we have the data because we have the custom data is like 2% and like 3%, essentially nothing. And so then we start like wondering for a long time, okay, why doesn't like IKEA kind of like enters there and disrupt everything? So what we did is essentially we went to our carpenters with like the IKEA catalog, and we tried to say, okay, how much would it cost for you to do exactly this table? And so this is like the price of IKEA in different like countries, like the poorest country where IKEA is present, India, Morocco, and Egypt. And this is essentially how much like, the good carpenters will charge us. So somehow it really seems that, of course, IKEA could enter there and produce there. It doesn't happen for like many other reasons, but just like importing like manufactured goods from abroad doesn't really seem to be competitive. So these firms, given the cheap cost of labor, they're still competitive, and given also the cheap cost of input. Yes.
Just a quick clarification question. Does this production activity include like quality control productions along the production lines?
Definitely not. There is not like the quality control is essentially I look at the good and I say, okay, this is fine. Yeah. But like to give you a sense, like we measure quality, and like in another paper where we actually used it to try to understand whether like firms that were more mechanized have higher quality. The main measure is whether the two diagonals of a door are the same length, and many are not the same length. Okay, so this is actually a good measure of quality. So to give you a sense.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. You brought it up on the floor. So there, the argument on the bullet was that there are no incentives to import IKEA products.
Yeah.
from abroad.
Or to open a showroom, not to open production.
But then that's, but the question of why doesn't it enter, it's like for production purposes, why wouldn't IKEA come and take advantage of all these carpenters?
No idea. On that, no idea, absolutely. Like, maybe the entry is a bullet point, give me some slack, but but I agree, the language is not great. This is literally essentially why IKEA doesn't open up a showroom and just wipe out the market. Now you have to justify why somehow the price that IKEA charges in Egypt and Morocco seems very high, right? Probably because they are tailored to this kind of high segment of the population. Right? It's like McDonald's, right? That in low-income countries a little bit more upscale. So there has to be some sort of stuff like that going on. IKEA doesn't want price to market too much, so lots of things like that. Still, I find interesting that somehow the price that they're able to charge essentially is fairly low. And if you think usually price is one of the productivity, at the end of the day, these firms are not that low productive from that perspective.
Presumably some of them could become more productive. Right? They could be
For-
more special.
For sure, that
And
for
then we
sure.
don't know what that was happening.
That for sure. And then maybe they have a competitive advantage into producing these goods. Rihanna?
It could go both ways, because on the one hand, the economies of scale might be even cheaper, but on the other hand, they might be less reliable. Because IKEA would need to get like 5,000 of those tables and so. and there
Complete.
might be- yeah.
Completely agree. So this is fine if you do one table. Then if you look at the delays, how long it takes to do this, and we have data on that, it's all over the place. So definitely you cannot if you are IKEA, you are a little bit drifting, but let me just say this: if you are IKEA, you go to Kampala and just say place an order for 100 tables, you're never gonna get 100 tables identical delivered in a week from now. Impossible. So okay, so now the kind of the new stuff. So task composition. So what do firms do? I start from very high level. So let's just think about 3 broad set of activities. What is called production activities. So really think of it as time spending passing piece of wood through machines. What is non-production? So supervision, management, organizing stuff, interacting with customers, and what is idle? Kind of resting or just waiting because you have nothing to do. Okay. At this level, you see that 60% of the times mainly is production, but there is also quite a bit of non-production idle. Now let me zoom in. Actually, no, sorry. First, I look at this one, how it varies across the firm size distribution. What do you see? Very similar, a little bit of reduction of idleness. And big firms are busier, and not that much of a difference. Still, even in big firms, still there is 20% of the time essentially people are just spending not really working actively, and there is not a big difference. But this is very eagle eye. We can zoom in. First, we look at what we call the non-production tasks, which we divide here in 5%. And again, you see that a lot of homogeneity, right? Think that in every team we have 40, 50, 80 firms, and this looks fairly homogeneous. So customer interaction is a big part of what is non-production. Organizing stock is another big part. What is supervision of training is very tiny. Okay, sure, a little bit more in firms with 10 employees, exactly as you would expect. But the difference between 10 and 2 is very little. 1 employee, we put this here for consistency, is literally 1 firm where the entrepreneur reports to spend some time supervising. Don't know why, but essentially why is this okay? That is literally one firm. Okay, so again, very similar organization. We can then zoom into the different production steps. So here we have to do it separately by sector. Without looking at the details, what you're supposed to see is that all these values very similar, right? It's not that maybe big firms can spend very little time designing because there is economies of scale in design. That doesn't seem to be the case. Yes, but
Is this across workers or within workers?
this is on average with all the workers together.
But they could start being more and more special.
Totally. So this is the task composition. So essentially they do the same set of tasks. I just want to essentially make the point that large firms are just replica of small firms. So there's some sort of logic of constant return to scale. And now the next question is going to be, well, who does what, right? Maybe that is where the specialization emerges. This is not about specialization, just about knowing the set of tasks. Where, I have no idea, but I suspect if you look in the United States, small artisan with a couple of people, or like, big modern firms with like, 50 people, they do very different set of tasks because some activities can be scaled up. For example, input procurement. So they spend time doing procurement of input, but they don't scale up. Every time they have to buy something, they go and then they come back. Okay, so this essentially is the reason, or like one way to think of this one is it's really concentrated on the scale. Okay, so now who does what? So you can think of at least two types of specialization. This is the third one, but I'll talk about it after. Across employees, you may expect that the more skilled employees specialize on the hard stuff. And between employees and entrepreneur, you may expect that the entrepreneur spends more time on like management and supervision. Now we're going to look at both of them separately and how they vary by firm size. So let's first look at the employees. Let's focus here. This is like we split employees into low and high earnings, just as a measure of skill. And then we do like the basic and like bars, and you say, sure, high skill employees do a little bit more of the non-production stuff, but again, the difference is not very large. We look at it for tenure, we look at it for education, and kind of the same picture. So a little bit, but not much specialization. We can then look at this across the firm size distribution. So I show you several graphs like this, where each dot is just the average for firm size of a given block. And here you have like two lines. This one is this line on the top. It is the line for the high earnings employee, the time that they spend on this complex non-production task and how it varies across the firm size distribution. You can see that it's flat, but also that the gap between high and low earnings employees is very constant. So if you have more specialization in big firms, you will expect these kind of two lines to diverge, right? Because in big firms, you can really have that the good employees do the complex stuff and the relatively less good employees do the simple stuff. Now, since you kind of ask, I know you're thinking about this, well, maybe it's because the way in which you're measuring skill is bad. So another way in which we can do it, it is essentially, actually, let me click on this because I think this is very important. We can essentially just look at, all that, just be agnostic of who is a good, who is a bad employee. And for all the employees, just look at the one that do more managerial stuff than the median, the one that do less than the median. And then we plot them here. And again, you just see like a flat line. If you have more specialization, you will expect these two lines to like diverge, right? Because in small firms, everyone does the same. In large firms, the good people specialize a lot. Okay. Without going into too much details, so this is just looking at managerial versus non-managerial. Here instead we classify the steps into hard and easy. See the same picture, of course, as expected. Good employees do more of the hard step, but just a little bit. If you have full specialization, this is normalized in a way in which this bar should be at 1 and this bar should be at 0, and instead they're very close to one another. Okay, and the same is here. This is within managerial stuff, and again, it doesn't vary with firm size. Yes.
So the firm size that you used to define firm size, is it only the number of employees within the firm, or do you use also other measures such as sale or assets?
We look at only the number of employees during the firm. It's a good point. We could have put here also sales. Of course, the two are very correlated, but not perfectly correlated. And we can try to do that. Honestly, we haven't done it.
Yeah, because you are not just finding a difference in terms of the key points that you are trying to assess across firm size, right? Because the firm size is like the number of employees is not that different.
No, that's true. That's true. So again, it's not that different. Depends. Like a difference of 500%, right? It's like these firms are 5 times as large as this one. But I'm with you that maybe it's really about trying to find the very high productivity firms, so we can do something more with that. Honestly, we haven't done it, but it's one of the things that we can definitely do it. So I think it's a very fair point. What I want to say is essentially that broadly you don't really see an organizational change, at least if you look across employees. Now let's look within entrepreneur and employees. Here you see more action. Entrepreneur do more of the non-production stuff. Okay, kind of reassuring relative to the employee. We can look at that of all the different disaggregated stuff, essentially all the non-production stuff, which there are multiples. The entrepreneur tend to specialize on them. Okay, so this bar would be at 50% if they do the same. But even though there is quite a bit of overlap, so employees also do quite a lot of non-production stuff. Okay, so again, what you get is sure there are these are more managerial. The entrepreneur specializes, but a lot of overlap. Really, the key for us is to try to see how this varies across the firm size distribution. And so here I'm looking at like my usual graph with like firm size. This is the one with employees, what I already showed you before. And this is the one with entrepreneur. And what you see here, you see like an increasing line. What does it mean? It means that yes, in big firms, entrepreneur tend to like specialize more. Now, is that a lot of specialization? Not a lot of specialization. We're really going to have a quantitative answer in the model, but we can already try to benchmark it because just in general, of course, there's a mechanical relationship here. If you're a big firm, there are going to be more managerial stuff, and so there is more scope for the entrepreneur to do that. But if that was the story, this would be like the expected relationship. Okay, here we are literally just creating a benchmark where the entrepreneur does every additional hard stuff in the firm. And so you can start seeing, well, there is some specialization, but not as much relative to benchmark. Now remember this picture because I'm going to replicate exactly in the model, and this is going to be essentially how, like in the model, we can pin down then the cost of specialization. Okay, how far we are from that benchmark. Okay. Any question? Okay, let me.
I just have a quick question. So, are you accounting for who's a family member and who's not a family member?
No, we are not. We looked for it recently because someone pointed it out, and we didn't find any difference, honestly. So we don't have family members. We know whether you're hired through a referral, which is family and friends.
Yeah.
For some reason, we didn't ask for their family, and we didn't really see any difference there in terms of like time allocation. And we look at it exactly because we had in mind some of the strategic interaction, but we didn't find much. Yes.
So you have this great task information, but are any of the employees, are they like listed as being a manager?
Very, 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 very few.
Okay.
Essentially, very, very, very few. So this is why, like, this is the entrepreneur because it's really about ownership. There are very few like real managers. Yes. And then let me move on.
On the question of Michael, so is the family member counted as an employee in the firm?
Yeah. Everyone is like, if there is a family member, it's still counted as an employee. And then will be recorded as employee hired through essential referral. Okay, now the question is like, well, is this surprising or not? Should we have expected more specialization? Very briefly, when there is no specialization, there is no specialization if there is no heterogeneity in task or if there is no heterogeneity in skills. And we find in the data that yes, there is heterogeneity in tasks. So some tasks are harder than others. We look at it in very different ways. And yes, there's heterogeneity in skills. So there could be specialization, but there's not. So there has to be a cost. Now, what's the cost of specialization? I don't really know, but I'll tell you like in 2 minutes a story that seems to be plausible in this setting. So these are the products that firms produce, carpentry, welding, and green milling. You can see already that here everything is customized. Okay, it's custom made on order. Each one is different. This one is a little bit more standard. Here there is even like a logo. It's often like fabricated, but at least it's more standard. So now, like there is kind of many theories from people that actually have studied organization that claim that if there is a lot of complexity, it's hard to specialize people. And so essentially what we find it is that just look at the last, by the way, I posted a slide online, so I know that I'm skipping through a lot of stuff, but if you're interested, you can kind of go back and check that what I'm saying is correct. If you look at the measure of specialization, which is literally just on average, how much more the entrepreneur specializes on the hard stuff, this is way higher in green milling than not in carpenter welding. And if you look at the many ways, let me just point one out, like price dispersion, right? If everything is kind of like standard, you will expect little price dispersion as in green milling. If everything is instead is customized, you will expect a lot of price dispersion. All many different, summary stuff that we look at, essentially there is more customization, more complexity in these two sectors, and also less specialization. Again, keep this in mind, I will then use the model in a second to then go back to this difference across sectors and try to see whether some of the predictions of the model are valid. Yes.
Is that also true within firm size?
Yeah,
The grain milling was larger.
Yeah, great point. I promise you I go there. The answer is yes, but I'll go there because the model tells me it's about the slope. So I show you the slope and release that. So what have we seen? Essentially, no big differences in organization, some more specialization in large firms, and potentially it's about some sort of cost to unbundle production. Why now it's 4:30, you want to go home? Why am I going to spend some time showing you a model? Well, essentially because we want to have a theory to try to tie everything together and understand the algorithm implication. and especially because I want to measurement. Okay, I want to be able to quantify essentially whether those fictions that potentially identify within the firm, whether they matter to understand the firm size distribution and whether they matter to understand the return from policies such as relaxing credit constraint. So the model. Here, no worry, no equation for now. Just gonna show you pictures, and describe you what's happening. There are a bunch of individuals that are born in this economy with a type Z, which is private info. They can become either entrepreneur or workers. Entrepreneur, there's this set, endogenous set. They choose how many people they want to hire. So it's a choice of firm size, and that generates the labor demand. Workers, there is going to be this endogenous distribution. They don't do anything. They're just the labor supply. Supply and demand match randomly, because otherwise the math is very hard. So that is why we are assuming this is private information. So this is not a terrible assumption for the setting. Then once they match, the entrepreneur has to decide everyone what they do within the firm. So this is really the meat, okay? Everything else is fairly standard, and they produce output. How is output? Well, output is going to be the sum of what the entrepreneur produces. Think of it as number of doors. The doors produced by the entrepreneur, and the doors produced by the worker. And this is going to depend on the assignment, which I'll spend the next slide on. There is output, then output is going to be split between profit and wages. How are profit? Well, profit is the standard, like revenues minus the cost. Here there is the friction, okay? The Marty's wedge. So we allow for essentially frictions that we just want to play around with it and show how it interacts with the rest. And then there's going to be some CS demand that builds up some curvature and some feasibility constraint. The wage is the piece rate. Okay, so there's going to be a piece rate element which we can measure in the data, and then there's going to be an equilibrium element that essentially clears the market. And then what is the wage that individuals get is just the average expected wage. Yes.
I'm thinking about this random matching. Suppose it's not random, and so all of the assortative matching happens at that stage. Then the firms themselves, across firms, are specialized, but then you look at tasks within firms, and then it'll look like there's no specialization.
Yeah, great point. So these so you're absolutely right. Among the type of specialization that could happen, but do not happen, is that firms can specialize in different tasks. And so something that actually we show in the paper that you haven't seen it and you probably not going to see for months, is that essentially all the tasks are done in every firm. So that is very important. You're absolutely right. So there is no specialization across firms either.
So,
yes,
Martin. Can you just tell us why you chose? I mean, you already both additive separability in the output, and I guess you go for yes. So I guess you've thought about it, and you want to go for this employment with self-employment in the firm.
Like the reason why essentially, my first part, the task composition, it is what pretty much justifies this. That is really seems constantly on to scale. It really seems that essentially you add a new work, you just add a set of tasks. So that is what justifies this. Now the other justifications, of course, more it would be hard to have some sort of complex CS aggregation, because I'll show you what happens with this one. But really, the constant on to scale in terms of task composition is to me the big justification for this assumption.
Right. So I think just not push back. You just constant reference to scale is going to give you the constant task composition. That's the multiplicity of the production function is what you need for the. No, for if there's a price for the relative price for the task, that's all you need for the composition to be very.
Fair enough. I can essentially have the constant on to scale is an equilibrium object with a known constant, with a production function that is not linearly additive. I'm with you on that. You're right. But this is definitely not a clarifying question. So let me try to push on.
I should.
Anyway, it's
I should
fine.
revert to my role and defend Mansour's remaining time.
It's okay, but
yeah, you can do it yourself.
Okay.
Residual claimant, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. So at the end of the day, okay. So let me spend some time, because this is fairly standard, apart from this assumption that Mark of course pointed out. But let me talk about the interesting stuff. This production line, right? How does this happen? So let me just zoom in now into essentially how output is produced, which is going to be a function of the ability of the individual, of the entrepreneur, and the assignment. So essentially, you just want to think that production of one door requires a set of tasks. Some are easy, some are hard, in fixed proportions. Again, very boring, assuming that essentially what we showed you at the beginning is a technological imposition. It's not an equilibrium object. This is then think of it. This is an entrepreneur line. Then there is a worker line. Okay, let's think that there are just two people in this firm. And for now, I'm looking at the benchmark without labor specialization. What is the output? This assumption is just that the output is your ability, okay, for the entrepreneur. For the worker, the output is a Cobb-Douglas of your own ability and the ability of the entrepreneur. Because, you know, we allow for the entrepreneur to be special, okay? Maybe it's about the idea, like the design of the firm. Let's skip this. Now let's bring in specialization. Specialization is a very specific way to look at it, which again, I think is reasonable for our setting, that is task swapping. So essentially, you don't change the composition of tasks, but the entrepreneur, like, you know, if Mark is my entrepreneur, I give him, like, you know, my hard stuff, kind of customer interaction, and he gives me his easy stuff to do. Okay, so this is essentially how specialization happens. How does specialization affect output? Nothing changes to the entrepreneur because you know, he's still doing all his hard stuff, which are the one that really matters for output. But for the worker, you see that now this, like, you know, ability component is itself a Cobb-Douglas of the people that do the customer interaction with, like, you know, weight equal to the amount of specialization. And then there's going to be a cost. And here there is a key trade-off, right? You know, if Marty's entrepreneur is more skilled than me, I want to specialize, give him the hard stuff. But this has a cost because we have to coordinate, maybe he has to wait, or I have to wait for him to do the hard stuff, to do the easy stuff, and so on and so forth. And this is going to be a trade-off. It's very simple type of specialization, but essentially it is the one that seems to be consistent with the data. Okay, equilibrium, which we skip it, is fairly standard. So now we have the model. I want to show you essentially a couple of results. Let me just, like, you know, look at one core result, and then I'll do, like, some modification. Do some assumption. This is, like, should be obvious for everyone that have worked with occupational choice model. We essentially cook the model in such a way that the more skilled people are entrepreneurs and the less skilled people are workers, consistent with the data. Now, this is the interesting one. Essentially, the model is, like, designed in such a way that it generates exactly the picture that I showed you before. So what I'm showing you here, this is for workers and this is for entrepreneur. It is the time that they spend doing the hard stuff. For workers, it's essentially constant in the firm size. And for entrepreneur, instead, it is increasing in the firm size. So the model generates essentially that there is more specialization in larger firms. Why? Well, because in big firms, there are more, think of it as like low-hanging complex tasks that the entrepreneur can take in and do. Also, this tells us essentially what happens when we change the like K0, which is the unbundling cost. If you increase it, if you make it harder to specialize, workers will do more of the hard stuff, and the relationship between firm size and the time entrepreneur spend flatten. Okay, and so essentially now I can go back, like, you know, to the data and, like, you know, look at those slope and really, like, you know, estimate what is the K0 and then, like, you know, run out with that. So this is kind of like, you know, the core, like, you know, lemma. Essentially, the model was, like, you know, built to generate this. Honestly, we then have also, like, you know, some kind of, you know, interesting result where we then, like, you know, can characterize the firm level productivity and show that is a function of, like, you know, how many workers you have and the ability to specialize. Let me skip this and just show you, like, you know, the main kind of two organization takeaway that I wanted to keep in mind from the model. The model is done in such a way that it can span to extreme. When K0 is 0, meaning where essentially there is no cost to specialize, or when lambda equal to 1, lambda was the role of the non-rival component, meaning where who does what doesn't matter. It's all about, you know, the identity of the entrepreneur. In these two cases, the total output is just equal to the ability of the entrepreneur times n. This is like the Lucas one. And so we call this scalable entrepreneurial talent. This is kind of like, you know, fairly deep, right? In the sense that in this extreme case, what is a firm? A firm is really a mean to leverage the superior talent of the entrepreneur over, like, you know, multiple people. There is then the other extreme case, which happens in our model where lambda is 0, so, like, nothing is non-rival, and when you cannot specialize. In this case, the model shows that the output is just equal to the average ability times n. And so essentially in this case, if you have a firm with 10 people or 2 people, it doesn't really matter. The firm is not anymore, like, in a way to leverage talent, but it's essentially just like a way to share the fixed cost. And in this case, of course, firms are smaller, like the efficient scale is smaller. Yes, yeah.
So here you're talking about specialization in a vertical sense. There are easier classes and more complex classes. But if I think of the founder of a Smith story, it's the same level of class. It's an horizontal split.
Completely agree. So essentially, like, you know, this is a model of one specific type of specialization. It is based on comparative advantage of skills. again, this typical like Smithsonian pig factory division of labor, we didn't build it in because we didn't really see evidence in the data. I haven't shown you a lot of it, but like, for example, we have like, the production step, we see the share of production step that individuals do, and they do 75% of production step in the firms with 2 employees, like the ordinary 1 employee, and 58%, if I remember correctly, in a firm with 10 employees. So we see that essentially in small and big firms, everyone does everything. And to the answer, like to Isabella before, I show you essentially when you split employees based on the more managerial or less managerial, there is a gap, but that gap is not increasing in firm size. So both in small and big firms, some employees do some managerial stuff, some employees do not do it. Why? I don't know. But essentially, since we didn't see any specialization, we didn't even try to open up that box in the model, and we just panther it and focus on where we saw essentially some specialization that is on this margin. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about the error. So in the second case, your firm has 4 people and mine has 2. It's because we have a different fixed cost. That's explaining the firm.
No. This one is like that means essentially why firms exist is just to share the fixed cost. Then the size of the firm is still going to be like, oh, sorry. In this case, the size of the firm is still going to depend weekly on your own ability, just because in terms of composition. If workers are all the same, but very little. So in this second word, actually, we have a proposition on it. In the second word, there's going to be very little inequality. Everyone is going to be like, very similar. The returns to managerial ability are going to be low, and so on and so forth. But rather than like, reading you this, let me show you essentially that these predictions hold in the data by looking back across the different sectors. So remember this picture that I showed you before in the data. I show you all the sectors bundled together. Now I want to open it up by carpentry, welding, and grain milling. Grain milling is the standardized sector. What you show is that in grain milling, workers do a little bit less managerial stuff, and the relationship between managerial time and firm size is steeper. Well, instead, it's kind of remarkably pretty much identical in carpentry and welding. Okay, and again, so we think of this one as there is like a lower specialization or like a bundling cost in grain milling, consistent with all this other evidence that there is less complexity and is simpler to specialize. And so back to Isabella question before, you asked me, I just look at the mean of specialization, the model tells me that what really matters is the slope. So this is really what essentially I use to back out the cost of specialization, and then endogenously, there's going to be more specialization in grain milling, both because there is lower cost, but also because firms are larger. But I can then check all these other kind of predictions of the model of the proposition 1, which you haven't seen, which I haven't read it, which is firms should be larger, and this is this specialization already talked about it. Firms should be larger. The gap is not huge, but at least it's consistent. Firms are larger in grain milling than in welding and carpentry. This is kind of more exciting. The model predicts that there is the relationship between firm revenues and managerial ability is steeper in grain milling. Why? Because in grain milling, if you are a high skill manager, you can leverage your talent by hiring workers without kind of diluting the average ability. And that's exactly what we find in the data. So these are like the point estimate of a regression of revenues on managerial talent. And we spend a lot of time to try to claim that managerial talent essentially is equally poorly or nicely measured in the different sectors. But again, steeper ratio with revenues, steeper with revenues per worker, steeper with lot size. Okay. Yes, so yeah.
Okay. Don't you have predictions on the distribution of size? That is, in grain milling, should you get a few very large firms and then a tail of very small firms?
So it is totally correct that we have predictions on the distribution, but conditional on entry. So this essentially is the same implication. It's just that we didn't look really at the variance of size, but just at the relationship between size and ability, because we don't have in the model predictions on the variance of size because the entry is also endogenous, so the composition of people is endogenous. But by the way, I think that if you look at the standard deviation, it's larger in grain milling, so we can do it.
Show us those bars, so the mean is pretty similar. That could hide actually a very different distribution.
This one, yeah, I agree. I completely agree, frankly. And I haven't looked at the tree histogram. I suspect that if you look at this one, and then if you look at this one, it has to be there is bigger variance because we know that like that. But I haven't looked at it, so I'll come back to it. The other stuff we can look at it is that there should be more selection. And so then, you know, the education gap, in Green Milling, the entrepreneur are more educated, the earning gap, and so on and so forth. And the age gap, like, you know, everything, like, these entrepreneurs are better in Green Milling. Okay, so I have, like, you know, minus 1 minute, but I'll take, like, you know, a couple of, anyway, like, borrowing from my question time, which anyway is going to be, I know, like, dear time. So that I'm done. So quantification. We don't have, like, the full quantitative exercise. I just want to remind you why we do it. Because we want to try to understand how large are these, like, you know, costs in a general equilibrium setting, and then also want to play around with, like, you know, with policy intervention. The key nice thing with the calibration, it is that essentially this unbundling cost can just be estimated separately from the rest. And so I'm just going to do it for both carpet and welding and for Green Milling, so matching these kind of slopes. And then I will, like, estimate the model on carpet and welding because it's my benchmark. And then I will try to, like, you know, play around changing the specialization cost. Okay, so essentially think of it as estimating a model to match this, which is carpet and welding, and then try to say, what if I keep everything else the same, but I go to this, which is, like, you know, Green Milling. Okay. So what do we get? So let's focus here. So this is the firm size, and this essentially is our target. And here on the x-axis, you have, like, you know, how large is the unbundling cost. So, like, if you go to the right, there's, like, you know, lower specialization cost. So this red bar is Green Milling, and this blue bar is carpet and welding. So if you can take carpet and welding and give them the same specialization cost as Green Milling, you would increase the firm size by, like, you know, 1.5. Not huge, but, like, you know, sizable. But what is almost, like, you know, more interesting is that if you will shut down completely any specialization, you would just decrease the firm size by, like, you know, half of an employee. So this is the extent to which we are close to the benchmark where you shut down any specialization. The amount of specialization that you see in the data doesn't really seem to contribute much to the firm size distribution or to the revenues distribution. Again, these are extremely preliminary, so please forget them, and then I'll come back with the real one in a bit. But I do think that is, like, you know, main takeaway, that is that it really seems that we are close to this benchmark of self-employment within the firm. Seems to be, like, you know, likely to hold, because we've been playing around already with the model for a while, and you'll always get something like that. The second exercise which I want to do it is, okay, now let's start from, again, this estimated word, and then let's just, like, you know, play around by essentially subsidizing firm size, like, you know, reducing the credit frictions. But let's try to do it either in the blue world, which is, like, you know, with the specialization cost estimated of carpentry and welding, or with the one estimated of Green Milling. This should not come as a big surprise, but essentially, like, if the world looks like Green Milling, if you reduce their external barriers, you will have a much bigger return on a dollar. Okay, why? Because firms can scale up without hitting this, like, you know, decreasing return to scale coming from organizational kind of, you know, barriers within the firm. And of course, you get the same for, like, you know, everything else. So again, the big takeaway: low returns to growth policies if owners cannot leverage your talent. So if there are these big, like, you know, barriers, if the organization of the firms don't really seems to, like, you know, change to take like, you know, into account you know, the new possibilities. So conclusion. What have we done in this project? Essentially, like, you know, collect new evidence and, like, try to build up, like, you know, a simple theory to try to argue that, like, you know, really seems that firms resemble a little bit the self-employment within the firm, like, you know, organization, where really a big firm is just a collection of self-employed people, like, you know, working side by side from a production perspective, not from a, like, you know, revenues or maybe not even welfare perspective, because we still see, like, you know, big gap. It's not that there is, you know, the entrepreneur earns much more than the workers. So it does have predictions from, you know, inequality perspective. So the idea is that firms do not really seem to play this fundamental function in high income countries of selecting the talent, right? You know, being that vehicle that allows to, like, you know, leverage those few, like, you know, high talented individuals in the economy. And this has implication for, like, you know, productivity and scale. Like, you know, very broad, you want to try essentially to shift the focus a little bit, you know, from, like, you know, who starts the firms, entrepreneur, to, like, more what people do within the firms, right? And again, this paper tells us, we do this a little bit more formally, that if the right way to think about firms is just as a collection of self-employed individuals, then we should not really care about the firm size distribution, right? It's exactly your point, because sure, you can have big or small firms, doesn't have big implication for productivity. And so instead we should, like, you know, look at both jointly, what happens within the firm and then who starts the firms. And of course, this has, like, you know, implications for policy. What you really want, it is, like, you know, large firms, but also, like, you know, firms which are, like, internally specialized and well organized. Thank you so much. And Yes, and the last one before taking the questions, and the last one, we should like do a like a round of applause to like the organizers again, Doug, ITC, I'm not sure who else. You're doing okay, great. I didn't do it properly, didn't prepare it.
So Rachel and Maggie and Ellen and me and Captain. Yeah, okay.
I wanted to follow on Oriana's question about analysis gains from horizontal specialization. Why can't you show us within the production tasks, the time allocation there? Because even for making the door, I can have someone paint the door, someone polish the door, and someone cut the wood.
Yeah.
So do we see any specialization there?
Can I take them one by one, or I forget?
Okay, I'll make an exception for you, Tomas.
No, okay, no, I take more. I'll take more. I don't want to be the one that takes a step. Okay, Alan.
I'm thinking about educational policies, and I think in the context of your model, it's sort of you can increase ability, but then the scaling isn't there, so you won't get kind of convex returns. But then I'm thinking, well, as people get more educated, their ability to manage or their ability to leverage scale also kind of changes. And so another way to phrase this question is, I think for estimation, it's fine. You estimate a certain kind of return to scale, but counterfactual seems kind of hard to think about.
Yes, Margaret.
I'm thinking more about this in the context of Tanzania, but when I think about grain milling, I guess I'm wondering where you draw your sample from. Because when I think about grain milling, there's like tens of thousands of grain milling throughout rural areas. And so I wonder, are you just capturing grain millers in urban areas? And then how do those firms that you're looking at compare to the large grain millers? So like in Tanzania, there are these very large mechanized grain millers that export to the region. So in the bigger picture, sort of where your results sit.
Great. Can I? Okay. Great. So starting from Rachel, sorry, like I covered a lot of material, but I have an answer for that, which was like my partial answer to Oriana before. We do have, if you remember, like we have this step data, and so for example, to make a door, there are like 7 steps from like polishing to painting and so on and so forth. And then first the composition doesn't change. I show you that, but also we know every individual how many of these steps does, and so that was like my answer before. If you look at the firms with like 2 individuals, they do 75% of the steps, and if you look at the firms with like 10 or like plus individuals, they do 57% of the steps. So across steps, there is a little bit of specialization, but very little. And then that figure where I try to say, okay, let's predict who does which step. And so I try to say, okay, some steps are complex, and I rank them based on their own self-reported complexity and whether on their return from doing that step in terms of wages. And I try to say, okay, are more skilled workers trying to specialize on the complex step? And there is a little bit, right? If I show you those 2 bars, they're like one was above the other, but definitely far from the full specialization. It would be that the high skill only do the complex one and the low skill only do the low one. So, and again, we have more in the paper, and we're still trying to understand how to organize it, but we didn't find at all much evidence for that horizontal specialization. And that is why we focus on this vertical one, because at least there we find something. On Alan, yeah, you're absolutely right. So then, again, the question was about educational policy, right? Sure, I show you that there is no big return to talent as Z, but maybe there is big return to talent if talent is kappa, which was the unbundling cost. Now, the counterfactual keep constant unbundling cost, which is of course to some extent a crazy assumption. Like you have to be very careful when you do it. What does it mean, that counterfactual? And also what is K0, right? We are thinking it is a little bit like a primitive, not of an individual, but rather of the business model, the fact that everything is about interpersonal transactions and relationship and so on and so forth, and that everything is customized and on order. So we think that that is what determines K0. We have a little bit of evidence on that, but to some extent we agree with you that understanding what reduces K0, and if some policies can do that, would be like huge, right? And here the type of policy that we think may happen is some sort of formalization. Like maybe you want to have more marketing, create a reputation, start having these firms produce standardized product all the same and not like, on order. And we think that if you change the business model towards something like that, that maybe will allow for more specialization. But this is all completely speculative. And when we do the counterfactual, we have to take it with a grain of salt exactly for that. The way in which I always describe it is that I think of this one as local counterfactual, which are okay to think of what will happen with like small change. That is why we say, let's go from carpentry and welding to grain milling. I don't want to take this model to go to the United States. It would be like nonsense, in my opinion. On the grain miller, so I didn't say this, Margaret, but you're absolutely right. This is urban and peri-urban. So the definition is more than I think 500 people per kilometer. So that was how we define our sample. And so essentially we are capturing mainly those type of like grain millers on the boundaries of the cities, essentially. I'm sure that there are like very, very small ones, like more in the deep rural areas, and we're not capturing those. So that's important to keep in mind. We spend a lot of time searching for very big like carpenters to try to see if there are or welders, if there are carpenters and welders that export. We haven't done the same for grain miller, so I don't have an answer for that, but it's like on the to-do list now. It is exactly to try to search for those like few very big grain millers, if there are, because I don't know if there are in Uganda, but if there are in Uganda, we are going to find them and try to see how they produce, but we haven't done that. I know that there are no big carpenter, but I don't know if there are big grain millers yet. So again, I come back to that.
I think Abdul had a question in back, and I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Marty has a question.
yeah, on the firm size definition. So I guess, how do you consider temporary workers versus permanent workers? Or is it only permanent workers that you are defining?
Yes. So
that's my first question.
Yeah.
And if you consider both of them, do you think this exercise will have different implication? And the second question I have is, I still believe the firm size that you have is somehow micro businesses, which are 10 I don't know, 10 employees or less. And if you do this exercise for like micro, small, medium, large enterprises, which has maybe one employee and hundreds of employees or thousands of employees, do you think this exercise will be?
Should I answer or should I take more questions? I take your question, Doug, I guess.
Take Marty's
Or Marty's
question and then mine.
Okay.
I say that it's super interesting. So one thing that you mentioned that you have in the data is a panel, and I guess here it's just like a static model. So I think it would be like super interesting to think about the dynamic implications. And for example, like UFUX and micro paper, no, that was, I guess, like it's an extreme case and how like these models would be qualified to share.
Yeah.
And mine, maybe, I'm not sure it's a question, but the thing you haven't talked about is the demand side. And I'm really interested in whether the lack of demand for standardized products is itself a function of low A economies. And I'm thinking of, I mean, both your examples, like the doors and, right, if you're building your house kind of 3 bricks at a time,
Yeah.
Everything's going to end up needing to be customized.
Yeah.
And so I think the fact that there isn't a demand for standardization is really interesting in itself.
Yeah, so let me start from the back. I completely agree. So then, like in the longer version of this, we essentially spent some time talking about why do we see that this type of arrangement, right? And so this is a perfect example of some sort of big push theory. If you look at the construction sector, like there are no, like we are searching for it. There are like still some old standards in Uganda, which are colonial standards on how houses should be made, but no one respects them. And then of course you may think that once you start having some standards, all door frames are the same size and you can standardize it. That didn't happen. Apparently someone told me that in the US, when World War II started standardizing the screws, that actually led to scale. So this I think is exactly almost a micro foundation for why there may be this big push type of stories. And I completely agree with you. We're agnostic on it, but these are the type of stories that we have in mind. On market, we don't have a panel yet, so there's no ongoing panel. We are currently collecting the first wave. We are starting from scratch because there was COVID in between, and so essentially we are now having the first wave of a long panel. We really hope that to put this paper out before we are done with the panel in 2-3 years. We'll see if it's gonna happen. But like honestly, the reason why we're collecting a panel is because both for this paper and the other one on mechanization, we want to try to understand learning implication. We want to try to understand how firms grow, if they change specialization as they grow or not. I think there is like a lot of questions to be asked and hopefully answered there. Just don't have it right. Here we have some follow up on the phone where we ask some specific questions really needed, but it's not like proper panel for the time use. We only have one snapshot. And on temporary versus permanent employee. I think there is like, Vittorio maybe is on Zoom, he's gonna hate me because we had this conversation yesterday. Because when I looked at if you remember, there was like in firms with 1 employee, with 0 employee, there was someone reporting supervision. And so I thought that maybe that is exactly because we measure it also with temporary. I don't remember the exact answer, but I think that the exact question that I think that the answer on the x-axis is the question, what is the size of your firms? How many employees do you have? In which we do not distinguish between temporary and permanent. That's my recollection. But again, I had this conversation yesterday, now I'm like blanking. But so that's my recollection. It's an important question though, because these firms change size quite a bit. They can double depending if they have like a demand shock. And honestly, in this first baseline, we have data on that. But we're not as careful, I think, in terms of when we ask the time used, we just look at the employees that were working in that day. In the new waves, we are really having a lot of distinction on what is temporary, permanent. Do you work in this firm 2 days, 3 days, how many hours? But we didn't have all that rich information in this one. And then in terms of other firms with 100 employees, again, we didn't find them. So literally in Uganda, we couldn't find a big carpenter or a big welder. And we haven't searched for the grain miller yet. So the biggest firm has 32 employees. We went to visit that firm in Kampala, and is essentially it's in our data set, but it's essentially the same as all the others. It's not like a radically different firm. And the firms with 200 or 300 employees, they don't simply seem to be there. At least they were not there 3 years ago. Now we are searching for it again, and maybe one this firm emerge, but I don't know. Okay, I think we're done, and you should.
I don't know if Robin and I are going to do this in unison, in harmony. I think you don't want
I was checking. Vittorio was saying something. Sorry.
You lost Vittorio.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
So I think just very briefly, thank you to presenters. Thank you to audience for coming and spending a couple of long days. That was a fantastic set of papers. I want to thank because the number of people who end up doing all the work to put together a conference is it's not me and Joe and Robin. It is a big set of people. So I'd like to thank in particular on the IGC side, I'm sure I'll miss some people, but Rania and Natalie, Shubranka, Laura, I'm sure there's others there. On the STEG CEPR side, I want to thank Leo and Anna and Monica, Ed, Lydia especially, who made all the arrangements and got everybody booked into rooms and did it all kind of at the last minute too. So just a huge round of applause and thanks for all of those. And very briefly, I want to thank IGC for co-hosting this event with us and for being a part of the organizing. I think for us, it's been huge to work with IGC. We're really appreciative of the work that the team put in and of the resources that IGC can bring. And then I think we probably do, I'll let Robin say something, and then I think that the funders have possibly mostly left the room. Not entirely, but we do also want to, I'm sure, thank our funders at the Foreign County Market Development Office. I won't embarrass Noemi by kind of pointing to her, but we really appreciate the funding and support that's made all this research, or made much of this research possible, some of this research and the research that you haven't yet heard from. So Robin, you get the last word.
So I guess I don't want to hold anybody up for Friday evening, but I just wanted to say two things. One sort of backward looking, which is if you went to a structural transformation conference at Yale 5 years ago or 10 years ago, there would be a group of people sort of moaning about developments all about RC2s and blah, blah, blah. And I think, the conference the last 2 days, I guess 3 days, demonstrates that, that's no longer the case. And I think the main reason for that is that sort of the macro side of development, the micro side has come together on, admittedly mainly micro data, but it's nonetheless come together on data. So I think that sort of justifies STEG and IGC sort of also coming together more because it makes sense and it's, it starts to be useful for policy and so forth. So that was one thing. That's the sort of backward looking. Things have changed and for the good. And forward looking, I think the sort of prism of seeing everything through the RCT lens, which is again the constant refrain of the macro development people, is changing as well. And the reason for that is many, but one thing I expected, as Oriana knows, is environmental stuff. And we've seen in this conference that if you're looking at things like damages, deforestation, pollution, climate change, those are not things which typically are going to go through that lens. They're things that are going to need structural modeling, they're macro phenomena. So that bodes well for those people who have those skills. And secondly, even if you think about the solutions to those things like systems change in energy, innovation, diffusion on many, many fronts, those are also going to be things at the macro level involving micro data. So again, I think it does also point to kind of face those challenges, collaborations through organizations like STEG, IGC, PEDAL, and so forth are going to become much, much more important because we're no longer just in that world of we need to reduce poverty, we need to increase growth. We have to think about all the kind of externalities that come from that growth. And I will stop there, and I wish everybody a good Friday evening. Thank you.
Thank you.